Toronto Maple Leafs have had a very busy offseason. Very busy. Who's in? Tyler Bertuzzi, Max Domi, Ryan Reeves, John Klingberg. Who's out? Ryan O'Reilly, Michael Bunting, Luke Shen, others. And then Toronto has to decide what they're going to do with their goaltending situation. So we are joined by TSN radio superstar Bryan Hayes, our good friend from TSN 1050. Here he is. Bryan, lots of contract uncertainty. Let's talk about the Matthews-Nylander situation. The Matthews no-movement clause is kicked in. The Nylander contract negotiations, according to our good friend Chris Johnston and others, are not going great. Let's put it that way. The two sides are far apart. How do you personally see this playing out, Bryan?
Well, I think the Matthews deal is just a matter of time. It's going to happen. I mean, it doesn't sound as if either side is overly concerned about that, Jay. It's just a matter of ironing out some final details. And I would guess the ball's in the court of Matthews in terms of how many years he's willing to stick around for. And the Leafs will be pushing for as many as they could possibly get and get the cap number as low as it can possibly go. But I have not been of the impression for the last really month and a half that there's much anxiety hanging over that whatsoever. And I think that's a good thing. And I think that same type of mentality from a Maple Leaf standpoint should apply to the William Nylander contract negotiation, because Nylander is worthy of a high number, but it shouldn't be much higher than 9 on the nose, $9 million per, compared to other guys that I think are in the same range as him that have been signing recently throughout the league. Now, he may be wanting more, and he might think he can get more next year, but if you're the Leafs, you can't budge. And I think that's why this is continuing. It's because the Leafs are not going to budge, and I think it's long overdue that they put their stake in the ground. And I think they should show some confidence that they could find a way to get this done in season if need be. So it doesn't have to be today. The season doesn't start for a while. Yeah. He's still got term on 1 more year left. If it takes longer than it has to, so be it. I think they're both going to be here long term, though, in the end.
But I agree with you about the Matthews situation. With the Nylander one, if he decides to really hold firm, Nylander does, at what point do you have to think about trading him? At what point of the season do you have to think about, we've got to move on from this guy?
I'm not sure you have to, Jay. I'm not sure you have to. I mean, listen, this is a cap system where if he walks, that is not ideal. But if he walks after a great year and they actually do something next year in the playoffs, so be it, right? They still got a lot of value out of William Nylander in terms of what he's brought throughout his time in Toronto. And that cap space will be open for them next year when the cap is allegedly supposed to go up. So if William Nylander is dead set on getting $10 million plus and the Leafs are not willing to go there, they should not budge at any point between now and the end of next season. If he wants to walk, he walks. I think it's long overdue. Brendan Shanahan, now Brad Treliving, you've got to have confidence in your program. And you've got to have a backbone when it comes to negotiating. It caused them a huge issue when they went through this the last time with Nylander, Matthews, and Marner. They've been paying for it ever since. They have to learn from past mistakes. You cannot capitulate just because the guy asks for as much money as he wants. They have to set a number. If he doesn't like it, so be it. I wouldn't trade him, though. I don't think you trade him just for the sake of it. If there's a great deal out there, go for it. But that should happen anyway. Even if you like the contract that could be in front of you. There's a deal available that's going to make your team better. Go for it. That should apply league-wide, certainly here in Toronto. But I don't think the Leafs should feel at any point that they have to do anything. And that includes the idea of possibly letting him play it out. He's a very good player. They're going to have a very good team. If he walks at the end of it, the franchise is not going to fold because that happens.
That's fair. Last time I talked to you, buddy, it was before free agency opened, and Brad Treliving went and added, in his words, a little more snot to his lineup, which I love that term. A little more snot to the lineup. So you got Reeves, you got Domi, you got Bertuzzi. Well, one thing I asked your good buddy O-Dog about, and he pushed back on me a little bit on this one, so I'd love to ask you about it. I said, you keep hearing about this Leafs dressing room these past couple of seasons being a quiet room. And this is a bad thing. A quiet room. It's a quiet room. Are these moves, you talk about Reeves, and he's the kind of guy who gets everybody together and takes them out on the road, and everyone's hanging out together and doing stuff together. Are those moves as much about that, Bryan, do you think? Adding a little voice, a little loudness to that room that maybe hasn't been there in the past?
Yeah, I think so with Reeves in particular, Jay. But the other guys you mentioned, and no one's talking about Klingberg. Like, does he speak? Do we have any understanding of the personality of Klingberg? Like, I wonder if he's walking around saying, do I have snot? Like, am I supposed to have snot? I'm not sure about that. But the other guys can play, and they're going to play an integral role. Tyler Bertuzzi's a really good player. Max Domi's a really good player. I think they're big personalities. I think that's absolutely necessary. I think having that in the room is big. I think having that with the media might be even bigger in terms of alleviating some of the day-to-day pressure of Tavares and Matthews and Marner and Nylander and Riley. Let those guys go out and speak. Let them have some personality. I think it's necessary because I think it's been lacking with this team for quite some time. And that's just looking from the outside in. But I think with Reeves, it is about life in the room, life on the road. By all accounts, he's maybe the biggest personality in the league. And it doesn't matter what's already been established in that room. He's going to step in and make sure that everyone understands what he's all about. And he's a veteran, and I think that's understood. But I like that type of approach, and I think that's an important approach. And I would assume that came from Sheldon Keefe. That probably came from Brendan Shanahan, possibly some of the players as well. Because Brad Treliving, like, he hasn't been in the room, right? How could he really know exactly what's going on? He's relying on the people that have been here beforehand. And if he felt that that was an important piece, I certainly wouldn't disagree with him.
I was a big fan of the deadline moves that Kyle Turris made this past year. Now, I look at, you've had like a month now to sort of digest the moves that Treliving made around free agency. Just on paper right now, Bryan Hayes, do you like this lineup as of this moment? I know we haven't seen him on the ice yet, but do you like the look, the makeup of this lineup better than the lineup that went into the playoffs last season?
I wouldn't say that, Jay, but I think to be fair to the current lineup is the way that the cap system has affected the player movement in the league. What we saw out of the Leafs at the deadline, I think will apply this year. So I don't think it's necessarily fair to compare this lineup today, albeit likely more moves still coming, right? I think they need to address their defense. There's some other areas where they still might move some money around and move some pieces around. So it's still really too early to know exactly what they'll look like opening night. But I think the day after the trade deadline is when you can truly compare and contrast, right? What they looked like Game 6 against Tampa when they won that series, or Game 5 against Florida when they lost that series, compared to this upcoming season's team, that'll truly be defined the day after the trade deadline. But you also got to remember Matthew Nyes wasn't a part of the regular season, right? He's going to be a part of this regular season. That's an addition, right? We saw him in the playoffs before he got injured. He looked really, really good. So I like the moves they've made. I also think you got to give them some more time, but they're good enough to be a playoff team today. I fully expect they'll be a playoff team today, but I also fully expect they'll be better a day after the trade deadline.
And I believe I called Kyle Dubas Kyle Turris, but that's just because I feel like Kyle Turris still has something he could bring to this team if they decided they wanted to sign him. Hazy beat the goal. Some snipes. The goaltending situation, murky. Ilya Samsonov's arbitration hearing set for this Friday. That, of course, will open up that second buyout window that we've all been obsessed with. How do you think the goaltending situation's handled at that point? Is Matt Murray bought out at that time?
I'd be surprised if he wasn't, Jay. If he's not, they're going to find a move for him. I think that was always the understanding that Samsonov and the Leafs were going to go to arbitration. That would open that window up, and if need be, they'll go down that road. I just can't picture a scenario where Matt Murray is affiliated with the Maple Leafs come the fall. I don't think it would be a sound move. I don't think it would be a smart move, and I don't think that that's the road they'll go down. What I'm curious about is if there's a third goalie that they can bring in. Joseph Woll will not be waiver exempt. So if you're going to have Woll up here, if you're going to put him on waivers, you might lose him, right? And they've run into that in the past. So I think they start with Samsonov, start with Woll. The question is, can they find a veteran third stringer that they feel they can get through waivers and get down to the Marlies? I think that would be a high priority for them right now.
Okay, Bryan is so versatile. He's going to hang out, and then later in the show, we're going to talk to him about the Toronto Blue Jays and their current situation. So hang out, Hazy B. Read one of your 2 book of basketballs, and we'll be back with you later.
Beautiful. Kyle Turris to the Jays. It's an option too, Jay. It's an option.
That's not a bad play. Very versatile as well.
Yes, he is.